Hey guys, welcome to another online edition of Thursday Night Worship. I am so glad that you have decided to join us as we begin to go into this new series called The Human Experience, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the beautiful mess of what it means to be human in today's world. As I've been thinking a lot about what this whole human experience is all about, I found a very timely illustration. It has to do with Aaron Rodgers. Now, look, if you're not a football fan, fine. I completely understand that. And even to some degree, I don't watch that much football, right? But still love my Bengals, right? Go Bengals. I hope they win this Sunday against the Chiefs. Anyway, besides the point, right? You don't have to like football to know what is going on with Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. Throughout the entire season, Aaron Rodgers has been in complete disharmony with not just his coach, but certain players, even his wide receiver that he counts on to make those touchdowns. I mean, it's no wonder why they lost. They just didn't seem to have that same kind of fire and passion that the Green Bay Packers are known for. This is a team in disharmony. And because the team was in disharmony and still is in disharmony, they weren't able to accomplish the things that they were wanting to accomplish, mainly a Super Bowl win. Because when a team is in disharmony, bad things happen. Destruction happens. The tear down of the team happens. This isn't just true for football. This is true for all things, and our entire world, really. Because when you think about it, we as a people, as a race of humans, we as a collection of creation by God, we are living in disharmony. Our selfishness, our self-centeredness, and pride have destroyed our relationship with God, with each other, and all of creation. I know this because how many times have you ever heard somebody say, look, I'm just going to take care of me and mine. I ain't looking out for the other person. I ain't looking out for the rest of my community, the rest of my country. I'm going to take care of me and mine. That's the statement that people make when they are tired of doing what they're supposed to do. They're being selfish and self-centered. This kind of disharmony exists on a global pattern, but we all know in our own lives that we can find examples of disharmony all along. As a matter of fact, when I was thinking about this, I thought about my worst job ever. The worst job I ever had was working security for this national corporation. It was the worst job I ever had. It was a culture of distrust and division. People were spreading rumors. People were talking behind each other's backs. People just wouldn't trust one another. And when distrust and lies, disrespect, or any other negative feelings enter in relationships, whether they be personal or professional, well, then you can rest assured that disaster is not far behind. Now, while disharmony is common today, back in the original day, back in the day of creation first being created, it was the exact opposite. Our text today is going to be in Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to take a look at verses 26 through 30. Then we're going to jump over to chapter 2, verse 25. But right now, we're just going to take a look at Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Here's the exact opposite of what we're facing today. God had created for the last 5 days the entire world. And on the sixth day, he decides to make what he calls his greatest creation, his masterpiece, as Paul will tell us later on in the New Testament. In verse 26, this is what God says. He said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. I look at this and this thought came to mind. This might sound weird to some people, and it might even sound a little off. But let me just throw this out here and then explain what I'm talking about. We as human beings were created to be Trinitarian. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when we use the word Trinity, we're talking about the very essence of who God is. God is Trinitarian, which means that he exists within himself in perfect harmony, that he is one God and yet three distinct persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But they exist within perfect harmony. Okay, this is a very intimate language. And so when God says in chapter 1 of Genesis, let us make man in our image, this is Trinitarian language. This is a very intimate verbiage from God himself about who he wants us to be. And what he's getting at is, if we're going to make God in our image, says God, then they have to be in perfect harmony like we are. So mankind should be as connected as the Trinity. Jesus kind of talks about this in his high priestly prayer in John 17, when he talks about this idea of praying. When he prays to God, he says, God, let them be one as we are one. All right. You can take a look at that a little bit later in your own time. But this is something that is common. This is a common desire of God throughout the entire Bible. But what does it mean? Well, to be Trinitarian with one another, it means to be in right relationship with everyone and everything around us. This ability for us to live in right relationship with one another is what makes mankind, humankind, able to rule. To be Trinitarian helps us to love the way that we were designed to love. So when we are Trinitarian, like in our actions, think about it. Our egos are in check. We share resources with all the creations. We'll get that into the next section in verses 28 to 30. And we rule with love instead of power, just like God did. If you remember back in the book of Exodus, when God met Moses for the first time, God said two things. He says, I am going to free you from the enslavement of the Egyptians, and then I'm going to give you a new land. To free the slaves was an act of God's power. To bring them into a new land was an act of love. God proved his power by destroying the other quote unquote gods of Egypt. But he proved that he loved his people by being with them day in and day out for 40 years. Regardless of their actions or their temper tantrums. And when we act like that, we rule with love instead of power. I want you to think about all this as you go into your first discussion of the evening. And there are two questions that I want you to ask. Number one, would you agree that we are called to live in a, quote, Trinitarian way? If not, how then should we live in relationship with one another and with all of creation? If you think that we should be living in a Trinitarian way, what will it take for us to get to that level of relational living? That's question number one. Question number two is this. It was mentioned that the ability to, quote, be in right relationship with everyone and everything around us is what makes us have the ability to rule. Do you agree with that? Yeah, take a look again at Genesis 1:26 and ask yourself, how does God's decision to make man in our image, as he puts it, how does that back your thoughts for or against the ability of humans to be in right relationship with everyone and everything making us able to be rulers over all of the earth. Okay, take about 10 minutes or however long you need to answer one or both of these questions, and then when you're done, hit play, and we will come back and discuss this together. All right, guys, welcome back. I hope you had a really good discussion on this idea of what it means to be in right relationship and to live in a Trinitarian way. This section, to kind of summarize, is saying that even though disharmony is the current standard, we live in disharmony within this entire world. We were originally created to live differently. We were created to live Trinitarian. Let's continue on in our text. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. Here's what Moses writes. He says, God blessed them, that's Adam and Eve, and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. As I read this, I can't help but to think that the solution to disharmony is living in harmony. I know it's kind of like this duh statement, but really, if you think about it, it is just as complicated to do as anything else in our lives, even though it is very easy to understand. The solution to disharmony is by living in harmony with everyone and everything. In other words, if I were to sum this up into one thing, and this is the one thing that I want you to remember, the one thing I want you to consider, the one thing I want you to think about through the rest of your week, the good of humanity is seen in every good relationship. What does that mean? Well, if we look at the text tells us that God has blessed us with the ability to have intimacy, be fruitful, to have familial relationships, multiply, and purposeful responsibility, and subdue the earth, right? So God has blessed us with these three things: intimacy, familial relationships, and purposeful responsibility. And every interaction requires us to live the way that we were created to live. So this Trinitarian lifestyle produces in us within us certain characteristics. And these characteristics require us, according to the scripture, to not let our power, our authority get to our heads, to not lord it over all of creation, but instead to be responsible and loving caregivers. It also means that we need to share our resources with one another. I found it interesting in this text that food was the only thing that humans were to share with the rest of creation. And it got me to thinking, why, right? Why does God, tell us to share this food? Now, this is my thought, and it's just a personal opinion, and I get that, right? And I may be wrong, right? But my thought is that God did this to remind us that we are all connected by God. And it is our responsibility as Trinitarian-like creatures, because we are the only ones who are Trinitarian-like human beings, to ensure that everyone and everything is taken care of adequately. There's a statistic I heard, and I can't quote where I got the statistic from, but I know it's true, right? That if all of humanity shared their resources, there would be no poverty. There would be no hunger. There would be There would be no inequality of socioeconomic positions, right? We would all be equal. But because of our selfishness and our self-centeredness, that is not the case today, right? This is why God originally created us to share the same kind of food, so that we would remember our connection as creatures of God. Our selfish desires and self-centeredness is what makes us hoard the resources that God gave us, that God gave the entire world. We cannot be responsible caregivers to this world if we are not tapped into our Trinitarian nature. And when we tap into our Trinitarian nature, we are able to see the world as God does, thus helping us to treat all of creation with the respect and love that it deserves. That leads us into our second set of questions for the night. Here's what I want you to discuss. Again, either one or both, up to you. The first question is this: God has blessed us with the ability to have intimacy, familial relationships, and purposeful relationships. In which area do you feel successful? Are you successful in intimacy, successful with familial relationships, or successful in purposeful relationships, or all three, or a mixture of the three? In which area do you feel successful, and in which area do you feel is a struggle? That's question number one. Question number two is this: do you hoard the resources that God gave you? What does that even look like in today's world? What does hoarding look like? And how can we make sure that we are sharing our resources adequately? Take about 10 minutes or as long as you need to discuss these two questions, or one of them if that's what you want to focus on. And when you're done, go ahead and hit play again, and we will come back together for our third point. All right, I really hope you had a great time discussing this idea of what our Trinitarian nature requires of us through intimacy and familial relationships and purposeful relationships, right? And talking about these resources that God has given us. And I really hope that you were able to challenge one another as you discuss these things. Because remember, the good of humanity is seen in every good relationship. That's the one thing I need you to understand and want you to discuss throughout your week. And that means that we should live within our God-given Trinitarian nature. Now, this leads us into our last few verses. We're going to look at Genesis 1, verse 31, and then Genesis 2, verse 25. Here's what Moses writes. He says, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. In chapter 2, verse 25, Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. So when we talk about Trinitarian living, the question that kind of pops up into my mind is, what needs to be done? What do we need to do to achieve this in our own lives? Well, the idea here is that we just need to strive. We need to work towards, collectively and individually, to have perfect Trinitarian relationships. I mean, look, God created a biosphere that was in complete and perfect harmony. All the ecosystems, all the creation, everybody worked in perfect harmony. And God says it's very good. Now, I don't know about you, but when I first learned about this term, very good, the people who were teaching me, the pastors and the youth ministers and those people who were over me, would always tell me that God used the term very good to speak towards his human creation. But as I read this, as I look at chapter 1, I have a different opinion. I don't think this refers to God's reaction to mankind alone. It was God's reaction to all of creation. It says that after 6 days, he had created a biosphere that was in complete and perfect harmony. The scripture says that he looked at all of his creation and saw that it was very good, which means that everything at that exact moment was working and reacting exactly as he designed it. Every relationship. And we talk about relationships, we're talking vertical relationships. That is relationships of people who are above in authority and below in submission. And horizontal relationships, those who are equal to one another. Every relationship was perfect. And humanity specifically existed as one cohesive unit. Not to mention that every other thing at that exact moment, whether it be living or non-living, whether it be human or non-human, everything at that exact moment that God created it was working and reacting exactly as he wanted it. And think about this. That means that there was no negativity, that there was no hurt, no pain, no bad thing, no evil whatsoever. All of humanity was perfectly at peace and had no reason to be ashamed. This is why Moses in chapter 2, verse 25 says that Adam and Eve were naked and they had no shame. In perfect Trinitarian relationships, there is nothing to be ashamed of. But let's be honest. Our world is in disharmony. There is a need for us today to restore the balance in order to achieve peace between ourselves and all of creation. Now, I've been talking this entire time about living in a Trinitarian relationship, getting us back to what we used to be. But unfortunately, there's nothing we can do. As much as we would like to have this kind of life with these kind of relationships, we screwed it up. Our issues and the issues of others around us and the issues of the entire human race created disharmony. And not just between humans themselves, but between the entire world. And no matter how hard we try, no matter what solutions we get, no matter how many smart people we put on this problem, we cannot go back to the garden. We cannot go back to the moment that God originally created us. And that leads us into our final discussion questions of the night. Question number 1, do you agree with the idea that there is nothing we can do to bring us back to the way things were created? If not, if you don't agree with that, what can we do? And here's a question. Why haven't we tried it yet? Why have we failed time and time again when we try to live in harmony? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is this. In your last moments together, I want you to have a venting session. I want you to talk about your issues with humanity, your issues with the world. And instead of trying to find comfort, and I mean this, okay, I know I'm a pastor and I'm supposed to be all happy, happy, joy, joy, but instead of trying to find comfort in spite of the disharmony, I want you to spend your time, and not just tonight, but the entire week, living with that tension. I want you to wrestle with these issues. And I want you to try to come to realistic terms with our current situation of disharmony in this world. Take 5 to 10 minutes and talk about these 2 questions, or one of them if you desire to only focus on one of them. And when you're done, go ahead and push play again, and I will be waiting here for you to wrap things up. I know we kind of led that last discussion with kind of a bummer, and that whole section was really kind of a bummer, but we're talking about the bad of we're talking about the good of human experience. But when we talk about the good of human experience, we have to talk about why we're not there. But I don't want to leave you on that note. Instead, I want to tell you this. The culmination and outcome of our Trinitarian relationship, when we really strive to be and accomplish being Trinitarian, the culmination is a peaceful and carefree world where the entire world exists in respect and love. Matter of fact, Isaiah talks about this in chapter 11 of his letter, where he tells us that there will be a time where predator will coexist with prey, and they will all be led by a small child. Now, I know we're not there yet, and I know that I just got done telling you that we cannot get there. Well, next week, we're gonna explain why. We're gonna talk about what went wrong and why it keeps going wrong. But don't worry. In a few weeks, we're gonna talk about how this mess of a world can be fixed and turned into something beautiful. But we need to wrestle with our current reality first, and we need to hope for something better down the road. That's what I want you to get out of the day. I want you to understand that there is something better that we were created for. That Trinitarian relationship with one another and with all things in this world. So I hope that this was a blessing for you. And again, whenever you want to discuss this, you don't have to just discuss this at home. You can discuss it with us online each and every day on Facebook or on YouTube, or you can email us or go to our website. If you want to go to our Facebook page, you look for us, Community Transformation Partners. You can go to our website, communitytransformationpartners.org. You can email me, larry@communitytransformationpartners.org. Or you can go to our YouTube page and comment there. Just search for, you guessed it, Community Transformation Partners. All right, guys, that will do it all for me. I want to thank Community Transformation Partners and the Bridge Church of Hendricks County for coming together for these online teachings. If you want to follow the Bridge HC and figure out what it is that we're doing and what we want to accomplish in our county, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. Just search for the Bridge HC or the Bridge of Hendricks County. All right. With that, guys, I'm done. I will see you next week, hopefully live. And we'll announce that sometime next week. But until then, as always, peace, love, and soul.